I stared at my phone, my hands trembling as the screen illuminated the dark room. The message was brief but chilling. We were never far. Attached were photos of us from that night at the beach house, images taken from the shadows of the woods. My heart pounded as the realization sank in. Someone had been watching us the entire time. Just hours before, we had sprinted down the moonlit driveway, adrenaline fueling every step. Behind us, shadowy figures emerged from the tree line, their silhouettes haunting against the pale glow of the moon. We didn't dare look back for long. Our only thought was to get as far away as possible. Earlier that night, we huddled inside the old beach house, listening to unsettling creaks above us. Footsteps paced the roof, each slow, deliberate step echoing our rising panic. Through the sliding glass door, we saw them. 5 figures standing motionless at the edge of the deck, faces hidden in darkness. Their stillness was more terrifying than any chase. But let me start from the beginning. It all began when Charles suggested a weekend getaway to his family's old beach house, a secluded place where we could escape our troubles. Charles had been grappling with his parents' bitter divorce and needed a break from the constant tension at home. He was always the glue that held our group together, the one who could lighten any mood with a joke or a smile. Riley, on the other hand, was still raw from a brutal breakup with his longtime girlfriend. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and the pain was evident in his eyes. He was eager for any distraction that might dull the ache, and a beach trip sounded perfect. As for me, I'm Alex. I was burnt out from work. The relentless grind of my job had left me drained and irritable. The idea of unplugging with my best friend sounded like exactly what I needed to recharge. We decided to invite 3 girls we'd recently met at a friend's party. There was Sarah, the adventurous spirit who was always up for anything. Emily, quiet but keenly observant, with a knack for sensing when something was off. And Jess, whose infectious laughter could brighten even the darkest of moods. The drive to the beach house was filled with music and laughter. Jess sat in the front passenger seat, taking charge of the playlist, while the rest of us piled into the back, joking about the weekend ahead. The atmosphere was light, and for the first time in a long while, I felt my stress melting away. When we arrived, the beach house greeted us with its rustic charm. Nestled between dense woods and the vast expanse of the ocean, it felt like our own little world. The wooden structure creaked slightly in the breeze, but it only added to the character of the place. We spent the afternoon settling in, unpacking, exploring the shoreline, and gathering driftwood for a bonfire that night. The beach was untouched, the sand pristine, and the waves gentle. As dusk settled, we lit the bonfire on the beach. Flames danced against the twilight sky as we shared stories, the worries of our lives seeming to drift away with the tide. "To new beginnings!" Charles toasted, lifting his beer. We all cheered, clinking bottles and cups, the crackling fire punctuating our laughter. That's when Charles first noticed it, a flicker of light deep within the woods. "Hey, did you guys see that?" he asked, squinting into the darkness beyond the trees. We turned to look but saw nothing unusual. "Probably just fireflies," Sarah suggested, dismissing it with a carefree wave of her hand. Feeling relaxed, we eventually moved the party back to the house, settling on the deck that overlooked the ocean. The stars were brilliant above us, and the soothing sound of the waves provided a perfect backdrop. Riley went inside to grab more drinks. When he returned, his face was pale. I think someone's out there," he stammered, standing just beyond the trees. A nervous chuckle escaped me. "Come on, Riley, trying to spook us?" But his eyes were wide with genuine fear. The mood shifted instantly. Emily wrapped her arms around herself. "Maybe we should go inside," she whispered. Charles tried to lighten the tension. "It's probably just a deer or some animal. No need to freak out." But then we heard it. A faint whisper carried by the ocean breeze. It sounded like someone calling out, but the words were indistinct, just out of reach. "Did you guys hear that?" Jess asked, her usual cheerfulness replaced with unease. We all fell silent, straining to listen. The whisper came again, slightly clearer, but still unintelligible. A chill ran down my spine. "Maybe it's just the wind," I offered weakly, though I didn't believe it myself. Suddenly the underbrush rustled loudly. Footsteps, rapid and heavy, were approaching through the woods. "Inside now!" Charles commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. We scrambled toward the door, tripping over each other in our haste. Once inside, we slammed it shut and locked it, our hearts pounding in unison. "Did anyone lock the back?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped. We'd forgotten about the sliding glass door that led to the deck. We turned to see 5 figures standing just outside the glass. They were cloaked in darkness, their features obscured. They didn't move, they just stood there, watching us. Charles moved slowly toward the door, locking it as quietly as he could. The figures didn't react. Their stillness was unnerving. "Who are they?" Sarah's voice trembled, fear evident. No one had an answer. Riley pulled out his phone. "I'll call the cops." He glanced at the screen, frustration crossing his face. "No signal. Anyone else?" We all checked our phones. Nothing. Even the house's landline was dead. "That's impossible," I muttered. We had checked earlier, and everything had worked fine. A thump echoed from the roof above us. We froze. Another thump, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the ceiling. "They're on the roof," Jess whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I glanced around and noticed something etched into the wooden frame of the window. Strange symbols that hadn't been there before. "Guys, look at this," I said, pointing them out. "What do they mean?" Emily asked, running her fingers over the carvings. Charles's face went ashen. "My grandfather used to tell stories about this place," he said slowly. "Local legends about a group that protected this land, long before my family built the house." The footsteps above grew more frantic, as if whoever, or whatever, was up there knew we'd discovered something. "We can't stay here," I said firmly. "We need to leave, now." We grabbed our essentials, not wasting time to pack properly. Every second felt crucial. We made a dash for the front door, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. We piled into the car, and Charles didn't hesitate. The tires screeched as we sped down the gravel driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figures standing in the middle of the road, watching us fade into the night. In the days that followed, Charles dug into his family's history. He discovered that his grandfather had been involved in displacing a local community decades ago to acquire the land for the beach house. The symbols we saw matched those used by that displaced group, a warning to intruders. We went to the police, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The photos, the messages, they all came from untraceable sources. The beach house was put up for sale, and none of us ever went back. The realization that someone, or perhaps several people, had been watching us, possibly seeking retribution for past wrongs, was unsettling. It became clear that some actions leave scars that never fully heal. While we may never know the full truth of what happened that night, one thing is certain: we were not welcome there, and they made sure we knew it. The experience brought us closer in some ways, but left a lingering unease that I don't think any of us will ever shake. We wanted a weekend to escape our problems, but instead, we found ourselves entangled in a history that wasn't ours, facing consequences we couldn't have anticipated. As I look back, I realize that some places hold memories far deeper and darker than we can imagine, and sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as I clawed my way onto the muddy riverbank. Behind me, the old pier groaned ominously, wooden planks splintering and crashing into the dark water below. "Mark!" I screamed, my voice raw and desperate. Frantically, I scanned the churning waves for any sign of him amid the chaos. Just a few hours earlier, we were laughing and clinking beer bottles, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink over that abandoned pier. It was supposed to be a chill night, just me, Jake Miller, and my best friend since grade school, Mark Thompson. Mark was the daredevil between us. At 28, he still had that mischievous glint in his eye, always chasing the next thrill. He lived for adventure, the kind that made most people think twice. Me? I was the opposite. I preferred quiet nights with a good book or casting a line into a peaceful lake. But Mark had a knack for dragging me into his wild escapades. "Come on, Jake, don't be a bore," he'd said earlier that day, flashing that infectious grin of his. "Let's hit up the old pier tonight. It'll be fun." I hesitated. The locals whispered that the pier was haunted, that strange things happened there after dark. It had been abandoned for years, left to rot and creak in the wind, but Mark's enthusiasm was hard to resist. "All right, fine," I sighed, shaking my head. "But if we end up as ghost stories ourselves, I'm blaming you." We packed our gear, grabbed a cooler full of drinks, and headed out as the sun began to set. The pier stood isolated, jutting out into the lake like a forgotten relic. It creaked under our footsteps, each groan of the wood sending a shiver up my spine. Mark just laughed it off. "See? Nothing to worry about," he said, giving one of the support beams a playful kick. The whole structure seemed to sway, but he chuckled and took another swig of his beer. We set up our fishing lines and settled into our folding chairs. The silence was thick but oddly soothing, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the old wood. As darkness enveloped us, we cracked open our beers. "To old times," Mark toasted, raising his bottle. "To not falling through this death trap," I retorted, clinking my bottle against his. We sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing. The stars began to peek out, reflecting off the calm surface of the lake. It was almost enough to make me forget my unease. Then, out of nowhere, a low, eerie groan resonated from beneath us. I sat up straight. "Did you hear that?" I asked, glancing over at Mark. He waved it off. "Just the wind messing with the old wood," he said, though his eyes flickered toward the edge of the pier. But the sound grew louder, a rhythmic creaking that didn't match the gentle sway of the water. It was like something was moving beneath us, something heavy. "Maybe we should check it out," Mark suggested, curiosity edging into his voice. He grabbed his flashlight and leaned over the side, shining the beam into the murky water. "I don't see anything," he muttered. I joined him, peering into the darkness. That's when we saw it, a shadow darting just beneath the surface, too big to be a fish. My heart started to race. "What was that?" I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. Before Mark could answer, the pier jolted violently, nearly knocking us off our feet. "Okay, that's not normal," Mark yelled, his bravado slipping. We scrambled up, adrenaline surging. The knocking intensified, echoing through the wooden planks like a sinister heartbeat. The entire pier seemed alive, groaning and creaking under an unseen force. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said, my voice barely steady. We began packing up frantically, our hands shaking as we grabbed our gear. But as we turned to head back, we froze. Standing at the entrance of the pier were several tall, distorted figures. Their limbs were elongated, bending at unnatural angles. Eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness stared back at us. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, blocking our only way off the pier. "Who are you?" Mark called out, trying to sound brave. There was no response. One figure took a jerky step forward, its movements disjointed like a puppet on tangled strings. My stomach dropped. "Back up!" I shouted, grabbing Mark's arm. We retreated toward the end of the pier, but we were running out of space. Behind us the water began to bubble and churn. More shadows emerged from the depths, figures rising slowly, their forms as distorted as those blocking our path. "We're trapped!" Mark exclaimed, panic flashing in his eyes. "Jump into the water on the side," I urged. "It's our only chance." Without another word, we leaped over the railing, plunging into the icy lake. The shock of the cold water tore the breath from my lungs. I kicked hard, desperate to surface. I broke through, gasping, and looked around wildly. "Mark!" I called out. "Over here," he sputtered, a few feet away. Relief flooded through me. We swam furiously toward the shore, the cold seeping into our bones. As we scrambled onto the muddy bank, I turned back just in time to see the pier begin to collapse. The figures stood motionless amid the falling timber, disappearing into the dark water along with the shattered wood. We lay there, soaked and trembling, watching as the last of the pier sank beneath the surface. The night was eerily silent, the lake calm as if nothing had happened. "What the hell were those things?" Mark panted, eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we're not sticking around to find out." We stumbled back to the car, shivering and silent. Neither of us knew what to say. As we drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those figures following us. But the road remained empty. The next morning, I woke up, hoping it had all been a nightmare. But the damp clothes and mud-caked boots were real enough. The news reported that the old pier had finally collapsed due to years of neglect. No mention of mysterious figures or haunting sounds, just a simple structural failure. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe the old wood had been unstable, and the knocking sounds were just the pier buckling under our weight. The shadows we saw could have been tricks of the light, our flashlights casting strange shapes on the water. In the darkness and isolation, our minds might have played tricks on us, fueled by the eerie atmosphere and local legends. But when I called Mark, he was just as shaken. "We saw something out there, Jake," he insisted. "I know what I saw." "Maybe," I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at me. "But maybe our minds just filled in the blanks. It was dark, we were spooked. He fell silent for a moment. Yeah, maybe, he said finally, though neither of us sounded convinced. One thing was certain. We never went back to that pier, and we never spoke of that night again. Whether it was just our imaginations or something more, the memory lingered like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. A reminder that some mysteries are best left unexplored. Story 3. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The image of that eerie figure in the antique diving suit seared into my mind. It felt so real, as if I was still there, facing the unknown. Just a few hours earlier, my best friend Mark had convinced me to join him on a late-night adventure. Mark and I had been inseparable since middle school. He was the kind of guy who thrived on adrenaline and was always seeking the next thrill. His latest idea was to explore a secluded cove he'd heard about from some locals while hiking the coastline. Come on, it'll be fun, Mark had insisted earlier that evening. He'd already roped in his girlfriend Lily, a spirited artist with a penchant for spontaneity, and wanted me to bring along Sarah, the girl I'd recently started dating. Sarah was thoughtful and introspective, a writer who loved finding inspiration in new places. We'd only been seeing each other for a few weeks, but there was an undeniable spark between us. We piled into Mark's old Jeep Cherokee, its red paint chipped, and the interior cluttered with gear from countless escapades. The windows were down, and the cool night air rushed in as we left the city behind. Music blared from the speakers, a mixtape Mark had made for road trips, with everything from indie rock to classic tunes. As the skyscrapers gave way to suburbs and then open fields, I felt a sense of freedom washing over us. You're going to love this spot, Mark shouted over the music. The locals say it's untouched, perfect for a midnight swim under the stars. Lily leaned forward from the back seat, her eyes gleaming. I brought my camera. Imagine the shots we can get. Beside me, Sarah smiled softly. She nestled closer, her shoulder brushing mine. This is exciting, she murmured, though there was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. I've never done anything like this before. First time for everything, I replied, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. The paved road gradually turned to gravel, and the trees grew denser, their branches forming a canopy that blotted out the moonlight. The Jeep's headlights cut through the darkness as we ventured deeper into the unknown. Are we sure we're going the right way? Lily asked, peering out the window. Mark chuckled. Trust me, my sense of direction is impeccable. I exchanged a knowing glance with Sarah. Mark's confidence was both his charm and his flaw. After what felt like an eternity, the trees parted, revealing a breathtaking sight. The cove lay before us, the moonlight shimmering on the calm, glassy surface of the water. Cliffs framed the secluded beach like ancient guardians, and the stars above were so bright they reflected on the ocean below. Wow, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. We wasted no time. Stripping down to our swimsuits, the night air was cool against our skin, but invigorating. Mark and Lily raced ahead, laughing as they splashed into the water. Their silhouettes danced under the moonlight. Shall we? I asked, turning to Sarah. Absolutely, she replied, her excitement contagious. We waded into the water, which was surprisingly warm, the gentle waves lapping at our legs. We swam out a bit farther than Mark and Lily, the sounds of their laughter fading as we found our own pocket of tranquility. Floating on our backs, we gazed up at the vast expanse of the night sky. Stars dotted the darkness, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people in the universe. This is perfect, Sarah whispered, her fingers lightly touching mine. I was about to agree when she suddenly tensed. Did you feel that? She asked, her voice barely audible. Before I could respond, a cold current brushed past us, a stark contrast to the warm water. It sent a shiver down my spine. Then, a subtle ripple moved beneath us, larger than any fish I'd ever encountered. Maybe we should head back, I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. We began swimming towards the shore, but an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. It was as if something was following us, just out of sight. I resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on the distant figures of Mark and Lily near the beach. When we finally reached the shallow water, Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with fear. She pointed behind me, her hand trembling. I turned slowly. Emerging from the water was a figure, a bulky silhouette clad in what appeared to be an old-fashioned diving suit, the kind you'd see in black and white photographs from a century ago. Water cascaded off the suit's metal surface, and the round glass faceplate was dark, concealing whoever, or whatever, was inside. "Who's that?" Mark shouted from the shore, his earlier jovial tone replaced with confusion. The figure stood motionless, half submerged, the helmet tilted ever so slightly as if observing us. The only sounds were the gentle waves and our own ragged breaths. "Is this some kind of joke?" Lily called out, but there was an edge to her voice that suggested she already knew the answer. A heavy silence enveloped us. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for Sarah's hand. "We need to go. Now." We moved carefully, not taking our eyes off the enigmatic figure. Gathering our belongings in a hurried frenzy, we didn't bother changing out of our swimsuits. Sand clung to our wet feet as we scrambled towards the jeep. As we piled in, I dared one last glance towards the water. The figure remained where we'd left it, a silent sentinel watching us depart. Mark didn't need any encouragement. He started the engine, and we tore away from the cove, the tires kicking up gravel. The once inviting path now seemed menacing, as shadows flickered in the headlights. "Did anyone else see that?" Lily's voice shook, breaking the tense silence. "What was that thing?" Sarah whispered, clutching a towel around her shoulders. My phone buzzed, startling me. A notification flashed on the screen. "Unknown device connected." "Hold on," I said, frowning. "That's weird." I checked the Bluetooth settings, and sure enough, there was an unfamiliar device listed nearby. Confused, I began rummaging through our bags. In the side pocket of Sarah's backpack, I found a small metallic gadget blinking softly. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, holding up the strange device. "I've never seen that before," Sarah exclaimed, her face pale. "Someone must have planted it," Mark said grimly, his eyes fixed on the road. His usual carefree demeanor was gone, replaced by a seriousness I'd never seen before. Back at Mark's place, we locked all the doors and drew the curtains. The night's events replayed over and over in my mind. Who was that figure? How did that device end up with us? Questions swirled, but answers were elusive. A week passed. Just as the tension began to fade, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. There was no stamp, no return address. I hesitated before opening it, a knot forming in my stomach. Inside were photographs, water-streaked and slightly blurred. They were of us at the cove, but from an unsettling perspective. The images were taken from just beneath the water's surface, capturing our faces as we floated above, blissfully unaware. I showed the photos to Mark, Lily, and Sarah. Fear and disbelief mirrored on their faces. "We have to report this," Lily insisted. We went to the police, handing over the photos and the strange device we'd found. The officers listened but seemed skeptical. After a cursory investigation, they concluded there wasn't much they could do. The cove, they informed us, was near an old naval testing site that had been abandoned decades ago. Rumors circulated about experimental diving suits and surveillance equipment left behind. "Probably some pranksters messing with you," one officer suggested. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. Whether we'd stumbled upon something we shouldn't have or someone was deliberately targeting us, the experience left a mark. We made an unspoken pact never to return to that cove. Yet, every so often, I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that silent figure standing there, watching. The image haunts my dreams, a lingering reminder of the unknown lurking just beneath the surface.